Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Well, I just want to say thank you for joining our webinar for Antecedent Interventions. My name is Cynthia Rodriguez. I am one of the parent trainers and supervisors for Bright Horizons, and I will also be one of the presenters for today.
Yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. My name is Karina Hernandez. I am a BCBA at Bright Horizons. So we'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So first, couple things that we'll be reviewing today is that we are going to review what are antecedent interventions, understanding what they are and why do I need them in my routine. Then we'll discuss ABCs of behavior, and these help us as teachers and us helping parents learn about them to understand the challenging behavior better. Then we're going to discuss the different types of antecedent interventions, some that we named here: environmental manipulations, priming, providing choices, and functional communication. And lastly, we're going to discuss generalization. How can we use these interventions in other situations, in other events, locations, and so forth? And then we're going to give you some real life scenarios so you can get a better understanding of everything that we covered today. So first off, what is antecedent interventions? Antecedent interventions are used to decrease the likelihood that problem behavior will occur. If we use these interventions, we have a higher chance to prevent the behavior at all. So let's take a closer look to see how that happens. To understand that, we have to have a good understanding of what the ABCs of behavior are, and that once again is understanding why they help us to understand why challenging behavior occurs. So ABCs. A stands for antecedent. What happened before the behavior? So our behavior is what it looked like. Did we see any crying? Did we see hitting? Did we see falling to the floor? Did we see yelling, throwing items? It varies per child. Our antecedent, as I mentioned, is what happened before. So was an iPad taken away? Was a broccoli something that we don't like giving to us, or so forth? And then lastly is our consequence. How do we respond to that event? Was our child hitting and then we took away the broccoli, or did we say no, or what happened in that situation? So let's give an example to just have a better understanding of a situation of ABCs and how antecedent interventions work and why do we want to use them in our routine. So in this picture, you see one little kiddo crying. Seems like the iPad is being taken away and it's something they love, and it's so hard to transition out of that activity. So antecedent, what happened before crying, is an iPad was taken away. Our consequence, we're assuming possibly in this situation, the parent gave the iPad back and crying stopped. So, what happens if we respond here? Well, first, in this consequence, in this area, if we respond here, means that we have to go through these entire events. We have to take something away. We have to go through the process of crying that situation. And sometimes it's really tough being in that situation when our child is crying, they're hitting, or whatever the occasion might be. So, that happens when we respond in the area of consequence. So now let's take a look at what happens if we respond in the antecedent section. So in this images, I want you to assume and pretend we have the same kiddo. I wasn't able to find him in Google again. So we're going to assume this kiddo is using the iPad, but this situation, we know that taking the iPad away, saying all done, time to go to sleep, or whatever the occasion might be, is tough. So this situation, we're going to set a timer. This is an antecedent intervention that Cynthia will later be talking more about. And then we provide choices. We provide a choice of here's a book or a doll. Which one do you want? So these both are antecedent interventions that we'll go ahead into more detail in a little bit, but we act on this event. We act at this situation at this moment, which has a higher chance of us preventing that behavior, meaning that the child might be more willing to exchange that iPad, give us the iPad in exchange for the book. They picked the book this time because they love Dr. Seuss. So our consequence would be praise and giving the book. Good job. Here's the book. Nice job, buddy. Tickles, high fives, whatever that might be. So once again, what happens if I respond here in comparison to responding on the consequence in letter C is that if we respond in A, we don't have to go through the event. We don't have to see the behavior happen, and we're teaching our child other coping strategies of accepting other activities, of responding to timers, and other strategies are going to be um, individualized and specialized only to your child and situations, of course. So now I'm going to pass it on to Cynthia to discuss the different types of antecedent interventions.
Thank you, Karina. As Karina mentioned, I'll be discussing different antecedent strategies. I do want to let you know that due to time limitations, we are not able to discuss all the antecedent strategies that there are, but I will be touching base on four different other strategies. If you will feel like you want more information about the other strategies or what best fits your child, I would recommend for you to communicate with your supervisor or your parent trainer on your case. That way, they are able to give you the other information for different antecedent strategies. So, the ones that I'll be touching based on today are environmental manipulation, choices, priming, and functional communication. So, first, we're going to start with environmental manipulation. And this is the way you purposely arrange or organize furniture, materials, activities in a manner that promotes appropriate behavior or learning to reduce impeding behaviors. So, this is how you manipulate your environment. And the way that I think about it is in two different forms. You could manipulate an environment to reduce problem behaviors, but also you could manipulate an environment to make those learning opportunities come about. So we'll be discussing those 2 points separately. That way we could understand them a little bit better. So first, we'll go into sanitizing the environment to reduce the problem behaviors. So we want to make sure that we are in control of those competing things that are happening in our surrounding, such as the TV being turned on or other toys or activities being in sight that the child could easily get distracted with. So something as simple as turning off the TV and putting other distracting activities or toys away is going to definitely help to make sure that those impeding behaviors do not occur. Because if the child, for example, is distracted by the TV, and then we try to bring them back to whatever activity we are trying to do with the child, then that could trigger a behavior because at that moment, it might be that the TV is more motivating than the actual activity that we are trying to do with our child. Another thing that you could also do is creating boundaries. So the child is aware of what is being expected in each area. So, for example, making sure that during meal times that we always sit on the table. That way, the child knows and is aware that if I'm at the table, that means that it's time for me to eat and I can't eat anywhere else. Such as if it's time to play, if you have a certain mat or maybe a favorite blanket where you guys always sit on top of. That will let the child know that usually when we sit on these items, that means that it's time to participate and engage in activities. Another recommendation that we also give is to make sure that all the items that you need are in close proximity. And again, the reason for this is because a child could easily be distracted by anything that is going on in their environment. So I'll give you the example. Say if it's time for dressing and you have all the clothes, but you forgot the shoes. So as you're dressing the child, when you leave to go find those shoes, that gives the child an opportunity to engage in something else that at that moment might be more motivating for them. So if they engage in something else, and when we come back to put on the shoes, to bring them back to put on shoes could trigger that challenging behavior. So it's just way easier if we make sure that if we're going to do something to make sure that those items that we need are in close proximity to us. That way we don't give them that gap to interact with something different. So now we're going to discuss a little bit on how you can manipulate your environment to make these learning opportunities. And we definitely want to build these learning opportunities because the more that the child practices these different techniques or different activities that we're doing, the more independent they are going to get. So practice is key. And if everything is just simply available to them all the time, we are not creating those learning opportunities. So these are some of the ways you could create them. Something as simple as withholding items that they want. So if we withhold items that they want, they need to figure out, how do I communicate that I want that item that mommy is holding or daddy's holding? So it lets them process and think like, what do I need to do to communicate it? And it could be something as simple as giving us eye contact or pointing to the item. And that's when we'll start giving those items that they want because they requested for them. Another thing is by omitting items. And this is very important. It's a little bit in a higher level of communication, but it's always important to keep in mind that we need to teach children this because not everything that we want and we need is always going to be in sight. Yes, in the beginning, we want them to request for items that we're holding or things that are available in front of them, but with omitting items, they have to think like, what item is it that I'm missing? And how can I communicate so I could receive that item? So, for example, in this picture with Mr. Potato Head, if the child knows all the body parts, but we leave the hat away, right? We give them the potato head, we give them all the other body pieces, but he can't see the hat and he knows that the hat is missing. So now they need to process like, what is it that I need and how am I going to communicate it that I need it? And in this picture, this child is using PEX, that picture exchange communication system, to communicate that I want the hat or I need the hat at this moment. Another way you could create those opportunities is by placing things out of reach purposefully. We want them to be visible because we want them to want that item, but are putting them out of reach because we want them to figure out, how can I get it? And that's when a child starts learning that they could do something as simple as getting mommy, daddy, or any other person that could help them and pulling them towards that area in order for them to help them to receive that item that they cannot reach at that moment. Lastly, another way that we could build those learning opportunity is by giving them closed items. So yes, it's very important that a child learns to communicate their wants and their needs, right? But sometimes I feel like we forget that we want children to communicate when they need help. And we all need help at some point. So this is something that is very important for a child to learn. So something as simple as giving them snacks in a closed bag could teach a child, how do I communicate that I need this bag open in order for me to get access to that snack that I want. And that's when they'll start learning to either sign the open sign or giving us that bag of snacks. Something simple as that will let us know that the child needs help to open that bag to receive that item. Okay, so now we're going to discuss a little bit about the importance of providing choices. So, providing choices allows the child to communicate their preferences. It gives a child an opportunity to communicate what they want. So, again, giving choices is promoting communication, right? Because now I need to communicate, what is it that I want at this moment. It also helps with that share control, very important because we all need to share control, that share control in our everyday life. So it teaches a child that things are not only going to happen the way that I want them, or it's not always going to be what I want, but sometimes we need to share that control, and I need to be able to tolerate somebody else's choices as well. And then the most important thing is that motivation. So if the child is choosing, that means that they want that item. And if they want that item, they will feel more motivated to participate in whatever activity you're doing or find those forms of communication to communicate during that activity. So that motivation is key there with those choices. And these are just to give you guys some example of different ways that you could provide choices. It could be something as simple as just asking, like, which one do you want? Like in that picture on top. it looks like mom's asking the child, like, what shirt do you want? Which is very important. Add these things on your regular routine activities. So, do you want the blue shirt or do you want the orange shirt? That gives the child an opportunity to communicate, but also the child will feel part of the activity that's going on. How should we do the activity? That's another question we could ask them. So, for example, if you're playing with blocks, do you want to stack the blocks to make a tower? Or maybe do you want to lay the blocks side by side so we can make a train? Asking them who they want the help from. Do you want to help from mommy or daddy, or do you want to play with mommy or sister? Anything like that, again, promotes that communication as well, and they feel part of that activity. And lastly, also, how should we do this activity? It's another way that you could ask, or where should we do it? Like, do you want to do it in the living room? Do you want to play in the living room today, or do you want to play in your room? Simple questions like that is definitely going to be very helpful in also in providing those choices so the behaviors do not occur. Now we're going to talk a little bit about priming, and priming is used to prepare children for a situation or task by providing them with information beforehand. So, this is just preparing the child for any type of transition that might happen. So, it could be a transition from activity, a transition from person, or even a transition from a location. These are some different forms that you could use to prime a child. One of them is just to simply let the child know of what's happening. Talk to your child, let them know, when we do this, this is what's coming next. The more that you talk to them, it gives them time to process and be ready for that transition when it occurs. One example that I like to give is if you were on your cell phone and it was time to put the cell phone away, and I went to you and I just grabbed the cell phone from your hand and put it away, you wouldn't like it. And because I know I wouldn't like it myself. And it's something that we need to remember and respect with our kids too, is that we need to respect their boundaries and we need to let them be aware of what's happening next. That way they're able to prepare themselves. A good way to prepare them is using the pre-MAC, which the pre-MAC is an antecedent strategy in itself. And that's just basically using the phrase first this, then that. So, for example, first you have to eat your dinner, then you get the ice cream. The important thing that when you're using the pre-MAC is that the second option that you're giving them, the second activity, has to be something that the child is highly motivated by or really, really wants, because that's going to become that reinforcer to do the very first thing that is in the routine. So again, if the child does not want to eat their dinner, then the ice cream becomes a reinforcer. First, you eat your dinner, then you will get your ice cream. We also have transitional objects or cues that could help during those transitions. I like to give the example of when a parent has to go to work or the store or anywhere. A lot of our kiddos have anxiety with that transition that mommy or daddy are leaving and I'm not going with them. So, simple things like putting on your shoes, getting your purse, grabbing your keys, and as you're doing all of these things, communicating to them that mommy's putting on her shoes because mommy has to go to the store, but she'll be right back. So as the more they see this and the more you communicate, those objects become cue to them that mommy has to leave and I need to be ready for that. But at some point, mommy's going to be right back because every time she does that, she comes right back. Another thing you could use are visuals, timers, or countdowns. An example of that visual is like that picture that you see right here. That's just visually preparing the child for what's happening. So the child is aware beforehand, before the activities are actually occurring, and it prepares them. So in this example, first is dinner time, then it's bath time, then we read, and then it's time for bed. So this allows the child to prepare themselves for each activity, but also wind themselves down to go to bed. Timers. big in helping with behaviors. I would suggest if you use a timer to use a specific tone. The reason being is the timer is going to become that bad person, right? It's no longer mommy. Mommy's not the one telling me that my favorite toy has to be put away. Mommy's not the one telling me that this activity has to end. Now it's the timer communicating that this needs to end, right? And the more that we use it, the child starts pairing it and realizes and becomes very independent just on that timer, to the point that if they start hearing that timer, as a parent or whoever is helping the child, we no longer need to say anything to them. With the timer ringing on its own, that is the cue for the child to know that what I'm doing at this moment needs to come to an end. And lastly, you could also use countdowns. Again, letting the child know this activity needs to end in 5 seconds. And as you're counting down from 5 to 0, it's giving the child time to prepare themselves for that transition. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about functional communication, and that is replacing a challenging behavior with appropriate ways of communicating. And when we talk about behaviors, we need to realize that all behavior is learned. And a lot of behaviors happen, especially with our kiddos that have language delay, because they needed to find another form of communicating their wants and their needs because they don't have the words at this moment, or I don't have a form of communicating at this moment what I need. So now we need to teach the child that, crying before might have gotten you the items that you wanted, or crying before might have ended activities you didn't want to do. But now we're going to teach you other appropriate ways to still get what you want without engaging in that negative behavior. These are some of the different forms of functional communication that we could use. Like I mentioned earlier, so simple things like eye contact and pointing, those things could let us know that my child wants a certain item. And many of us would understand that if they point, that is what they want. So let me give it to that child. Pulling could let us know that the child needs help in another room, or even let us know that they want to engage with me in an activity somewhere with them. So pooling communicates a lot. Gestures, if a child could do a gesture simply by putting arms up, that lets us know that the child wants me to hold them, hug them at that moment. Handing items could let us communicate to ourselves that the child needs help with that item. Maybe I need to open this item for them. Signs such as all done, eating, or there's so many other signs that we could use with kiddos that communicates to us what they need at that moment. PECs, like I mentioned earlier, which is that picture exchange communication, which is also an example there with that apple, is when a child learns to communicate through pictures. If a child has me a picture of an apple, that lets me know that, okay, he wants an apple, let me get him an apple. And of course, if your child is using word approximations, words, or phrases, we definitely want to encourage those instead of that problem behavior or that challenging behavior. Um, I'm going to give you some examples of that functional communication. So we'll start with the escape one. The picture on the top, the little girl is laying on the floor because she no longer wants to participate in this activity. So with her, if we teach her something as simple as signing all done, she replaces that behavior with something that's more appropriate, and she no longer needs to throw herself on the floor. Now she simply signs all done. Now we know that what she wants and what she needs at the moment, and we'll respect what she wants at that moment. On the other picture on top, we have a little girl that's crying because she wants a toy. So with her, we're going to replace that behavior with something as simple as pointing to let me know that this is the toy that I want. That way I could provide it for her. On the bottom, we have a little kid that's screaming for attention. So with him, what we could do is teach him that something as simple as a tap could get you the attention. You no longer need to scream to get the attention. And the last picture is a kiddo that is seeking that sensory input. In this example, he's seeking for that visual sensory input. So with him is with bubbles. So if he needs that, we could teach him that he could sign bubbles, or even if the bubbles are present, he could simply bring us the bubbles, and that will communicate to us that he wants bubbles. Let me open the bubbles for him, or let me blow the bubbles for him. So functional communication is great in reducing behaviors, but it's something that you could definitely still communicate and discuss with your parent trainer and your supervisor. That way they could give you ideas on what you replacement behavior you could use individualized to your child. And now that I spoke a little bit about these antecedent interventions, now Karina is going to talk to you a little bit on how we could generalize these different skills.
Thank you, Cynthia. Mhm. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about different types of antecedent interventions, how and when we can use them, I'm going to give you other ideas of locations you can use them or different settings. So, um, although we spend a lot of time at home during these times, we still have those opportunities of going to shopping trips, some family gatherings, going to the doctor and dining out. So these are other situations that are very important to us, our families, for our children to experience. So how can we use those antecedent interventions in those situations that might be a challenge for a child? So some things that I want to note first is what can I do every day? So a couple of things is using visuals such as social stories, video modeling, and visual schedules. Cynthia already gave you an example of visual schedules of evening schedule of what we do getting ready to bed. So I'll go ahead and give you two examples for social stories and video modeling. So in this slide, you see that on the left side, there's a social story of someone going to the doctor. It can start off, every social story is different. So something that we can help you create, your supervisor, parent trainer can help you create one for your child specifically. But in this one, we're going to the doctor. The story talks about going to the doctor, checking in, waiting, getting called by the nurse, and doing all that process of getting on the scale, checking our ears, our mouth, our eyes, and so forth. But then it just lets them know what is coming up, how the trip ends, and that everything will be okay because we're going there so we can get checked and have a healthy body. And then, even if you want to add, we're going to the park after or go get something yummy to eat. Everything, anything can be added to this social story because it's individualized to you and your family. And then to the right side, there's two videos of potty training found on YouTube. So if potty training is something that's coming up for your child and is not working with just trying to sit them on the potty, use these videos to your advantage. Look them up. You can use one that's animated. There's Elmo, there's Paw Patrol, there's all kinds. Or there's now more with kiddos, their age, doing that process, doing that routine, and they get to see another peer their same age and may become motivated to do so. So those are two other ideas of trying for these other routines or other settings. So other ideas you can try is continue to prime. Prime from the day before, especially for those more challenging situations such as going to the doctor. Letting them know since the day before, we're going to the doctor tomorrow, check our tummy, so forth. Read them the story next day, letting them know, getting in the car and preparing them as much as possible. And lastly, pretend play. I love pretend play. You can pretend to be the doctor in this situation if it's the most challenging time, but you can pretend a lot of these situations as well at your home, the more and more as possible. So now that we discussed various types, I'm going to touch two in specific. The first one is shopping trips. So you see in this picture, mom entering that toy aisle at Walmart. We've all been in this moment when we're trying to speed through Walmart, get our items, or we're just going for a couple of things that we need for the week, but we cross through these aisles or we have to pass through there to get to the other side, so forth. And our kiddos notice it too. So they see it, they start walking that way, they start pulling us, they start yelling, whatever the occasion might be, letting us know they want to go there. But as parents, we have to let them know that every time we go to Walmart doesn't mean a new toy. Sometimes we get a new toy when we go, but not every single time. So what can we do in those situations? Some ideas is making a contract with your child. You can do it visually, printing out some pictures like a social story, um, or telling them verbally, letting them know today we're going to Walmart, but no toys. We can get a candy, or we can take our favorite toy. So for giving them an option, giving them those choices that share control. Another idea is bringing toys and snacks along. I like to recommend a special goodie bag for your outings, for the times you go out to the community, that you only leave at your car in your car with toys that your child doesn't have access unless we go out to the stores or out to eating to the restaurant. And the reason why is because those toys, because there's only access to them, they only get to use them during those specific times, there's going to be higher motivation. They're going to have higher value. So they're going to want to play those when offered as a choice versus the toy they have in their room every day. So that's something I love to suggest. The next one is creating a job for your child to keep them busy. Help me pick all the vegetables, help me pick all the fruit, put them inside the cart. It gets fun. The last one is starting with short trips if possible, meaning that that will be an opportunity for you and your child and your family to work on this skill, helping them accept no to a toy and an alternative. If short trips are not possible, something that I will recommend is visiting during less busier times in the morning, during the weekdays, so forth. And then starting with stores that your child is more successful at. What I mean by that is that there might be a store that might be easier for your child to stay next to you if you're working on walking next to you, such as like a smaller store versus something bigger like Walmart. So you might be able to start something like there to help them learn that skill with you and prevent other behaviors. Lastly, frequency is super important. Making sure that we try and try and try. Know these situations can be challenging. We want to possibly avoid them because of everything that happens, but frequency is important to just let our children know that practice makes perfect, and practicing these strategies at home will also get allow them to practice much more. Another situation would be dining out. Some challenges identified are staying in seat, noise level, and picky eating. So, a couple of things you can try is identify busy times or make a reservation for when staying in the seat is a challenge. So, let's say we can't do that, or it just happens to be busy even with the reservation. We can walk around the restaurant while waiting for a seat. We can also check the menu ahead of time for picky eaters. If we see that that restaurant somewhere that everybody wants to go, but unfortunately they don't have the food our child likes, go ahead and bring your preferred foods from home. Do so they can enjoy that moment with everybody. And then ensuring your child is hungry. You might have a reservation coming up, trying to set a schedule for their meals if possible and avoiding any snacking before, just to ensure they're hungry. Other things is asking for a seating arrangement for noise level and bringing table activities. Do so to keep our children busy during this situation. All right. So that was it. Now it's time to recap everything that we learned today and that we shared with you. So starting off, what are antecedent interventions? The ones that we share, the antecedent interventions that you learned today are few, but there is so many more that will allow you to help prevent the behavior. a behavior. So remembering from the slides that we first started, if we act on A before the behavior occurs, if we identify what is a challenge for a child, what situations, then we are more likely to prevent that behavior. We don't have to go through that whole situation and then respond at C. Then we learned a little bit more about the different types of antecedent intervention. So the first one we talked about was environmental manipulation. And I want you to think about the external world. What's around my child? What's around us? What can I clean? What can I remove for less distractions? Or what can I put at a higher level of them, but still visible so they can ask me for them? What can I do to the surrounding to help set up those learning opportunities. Then we talked about providing choices. So sharing control. I want you to think about sharing control. We need to get this activity done or this routine, but I'm going to meet my child middle in the middle. I'm going to give them choices so I know where their motivation is at or they're feeling that they're part of this activity. Priming, think about prepping. Let me prep my child for this event, this situation that's hard for them. Letting them know we're going to the doctor tomorrow. And lastly, we talked about functional communication. Think about the functions of behavior. What is my child trying to communicate to me? Why are they engaging in this behavior? And what is the appropriate way for me and for me to help them communicate in a more appropriate way? And lastly, we discussed different ways to generalize antecedent interventions to other situations. And now that we talked about that, I'm going to go ahead and share a poll with you. But before sharing the poll, I will be reading out loud our example and then I'll share that so you can give us an insight of what you learned today, and then we'll discuss the answers in a little bit. So, what should I do? In this situation, it is sometimes difficult to have my child attend to an activity for more than 1 minute. One, I should prime my child by letting them know what we're going to play. Or two, bring out one toy at a time and place all other toys in the bin. So now I'm going to share that poll with you. And if you can answer that for us, that'll be awesome. Awesome. All right. So, in this question, the first option was priming my child by letting them know what we're going to play. And then the second option was bringing out one toy at a time. So, we got an answer for number one. Um, I'm going to share first the correct answer, which is option number two. Thank you for your response. And it's good. It's good. Let's discuss why it was option two instead of one, because we all are learning right now. So let's discuss first what number two is. So number two talks about bringing out one toy at a time, placing all other toys in a bin. So in this situation, our child is having a hard time finding motivation, could be, or also finding interest in one activity. So it might be that there's other things in our environment, more things around us that the child's finding more interesting, or maybe a distraction. So as we discussed in one of the slides, putting some toys away will allow the child to see what's the only activity, to be the most interesting thing. It happens because they don't get to walk away and go get another toy, and they see, wow, this is a toy, is making it fun and exciting. So that is why question answer number two is the correct one. The first one is a type of antecedent intervention, which is priming. we let our children know and everybody else about things that are coming up that might be a little bit more difficult than other situations, or that maybe think about aversive, something that we don't look forward to doing because it might have caused something scary in the past, some scary feeling. So we try to avoid it. That's why I use the doctor a lot, because it's scary going to the doctor or going to the grocery store. It's not aversive, but maybe we want to run and do all these things, but we have to stay seated in our car seat in the grocery shopping cart. So things like that, I would like for if that helps a little bit more. And the second one is environmental manipulation. So thank you so much for your participation. We'll try one more time, one more question to see, regarding antecedent interventions as well. So in this situation, before going to bed, my child typically cries to get access to his iPad, but it's too late and it's time for bed. I should provide choices like a book or a stuffed animal, or to have him request an iPad when he is calm. So let me go ahead and share that poll with everybody, and I'll give 1 minute for everyone to answer. Awesome. All right. So, in this situation, the correct answer is providing two choices. So, great job answering that question. So, in this situation, yes, you can identify that it's late. It's time for bed. Our child wants the iPad, but it's no longer available. It's time to go to bed, and giving the iPad more can delay their time to bed, can delay their whole routine. So we want to provide them choices, sharing that control. I'll allow you to play, or maybe allow you to do something else that might be calming towards the end of the day, but iPad is no longer available. And so that is an example of choices. In the second, as for the second option, requesting an iPad when calm is perfect. Saying iPad or giving the icon of an iPad, or pointing to the iPad is very appropriate, especially when calm, and it's a form of functional communication. But unfortunately, this time it's no longer available, so we have to provide those choices to our child. So, very nice job there. Thank you so much for your participation. That concludes our presentation for today. I want to thank you for joining us today. Here is our social media accounts for you to keep update with other parent webinars coming up, or any resources that we put out to our families and the community. But other than that, we'll stay here for 10 more minutes or so to answer any questions that you may have for us. Thank you.